Alright guys, welcome back to, well, a completely new video I guess, so it's not a welcome back, but welcome back to my channel. Basically, this is the first AOM video I've ever made, and we're going to go through what to expect when the Japanese Pantheon drops in literally tomorrow. So all I can say is I'm super excited, really quickly, and my history with AOM. I used to play this game as a kid like many of you I'm sure. And back then, especially in Australia, playing a game on a PC basically meant that, basically in AOM especially, meant you would play the campaign and you play like a few AR games and that would be pretty much it, and then you muck around in like the custom thing. So we don't have like the super pro knowledge that a lot of other people did, especially back then. We didn't have like access to the internet. It was like super unrealistic to have internet in your home, and even if you did, it was super slow and it was absolute rubbish. So like if you wanted to use the internet, you basically go to school and use the internet. That's basically how bad it was in Australia back then. Now, I'm not the most pro player person at AOM at all, so I'm literally like a casual that loves playing the game. I love playing all the DLCs. I love playing online with random people, even if I get my ass completely whooped, right? I still love playing the game because it's just so much fun. And yeah, I've dabbled in some other strategy games as well. I've played Age of Empires just a little bit. I've also played a tank game that I can't remember the name of, unfortunately. Yeah, it was really popular back then, but anyways. Point is, I've played a fair bit of strategy games, not too much, right? And I'm like a casual at the game. I'm not a super pro, so don't expect any like super game-changing strategies out of me. But I do understand how the game works. I do understand how to play the game and all the other pantheons and everything like that. So hopefully my insight will get you guys excited and maybe give you a little bit of information on how to play the Japanese pantheons and all the units. Some quick overall information about the Japanese Pantheon though. We have been told by the devs of the game that Japanese armies are going to be smaller than all the other Pantheons. That's because they are going to have really strong units and you're going to have to use them more strategically than all the other Pantheons, which is really good because, well, we're playing a strategy game. So we are going to go through everything today. We're going to go through the major gods, their god powers. We're going to go through the minor gods and maybe their minor god powers if they have that information available. Then we're going to go through the myth units from every age that we get. And then we'll go through the more like normal units. And then we'll go towards how your town center units are going to work by the end. So first of all, first major god and their god powers. We have Amaterasu, goddess of the sun. Is a goddess of god? Wait, is a goddess or god? I'm not sure. But anyway, it's of the sun. And basically, this pretty much works, the activation of this god power works like Valor. You target one unit, you click on it, and it does that thing. This god power is called Solar Shield, and it makes one unit that you pick extremely durable. It will give them probably like a crazy amount of like hack armor and crush armor, something like that, and it will be like really hard to kill this one unit. Early on in the game, you might use this on like a myth unit. I'm not sure if you can target a myth unit, but if you can, that'd be pretty nuts. If you target that on your early game myth unit and then go harass the enemy with it, right, and they really can't kill this thing, it's like free harassment pretty much. But if you're going to use it later on, you might use it on like a super strong hero that you would get, you know, from, I'm sure, the Heavenly Spear DLC campaign. The main character of that will be a hero in your normal games, and you might use it on one of those so they just do a whole bunch of damage and they literally just don't die. Now, Tsuyomi, I'm sure I butchered that name, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher a lot of other Japanese names, and I apologize in advance. God of the Moon, and loosely based in the night as well. as a god power called New Moon, and this god power is, out of all the major gods, is probably the most game changing out of the lot. Unlike Amaterasu, the Solar Shield is just like one time use, and like obviously you can use it again with a favor cost, but it's very simple. Whereas New Moon is going to be either a really big god power that will change a game, or it may not. So basically the way it works is you target one building. This could be, now I don't know what all the Japanese buildings are called, but I'm going to leave it in comparison and name them as Greek buildings, so it's nice and easy, because Greeks are like the base game thing, right? You could target a barracks, you could target a fortress, you could target an armory, you could target a watchtower. All of these buildings that have a lot of text in them, right? You know, when you go to the armory, you have at least, what is it, 12, at least 12 texts minimum in an armory, you know, all together. With the New Moon, let's say, if you don't get any of the text from your armory, and you try and just like speed run it from the Archaic to the Mythical Age, I don't know if that's going to be possible or not with the Japanese Pantheon, but let's just say we theoretically do this, and I never get a single upgrade from the armory. This armory will have, and I target it with the New Moon God Power, it will have all of its text researched immediately and permanently, up until the age you do it. So maybe I do it in the Heroic Age on a Barracks, for example. The Barracks, up until that point, if I have no text on it, all of the text up until that Heroic Age in which I've used it will be permanently researched immediately for that building. And for a duration of time, it doesn't say how long, if you target a military building, it will also pump out units a lot faster as well. So yeah, this is going to be pretty nuts, I think. And I don't know how the devs are going to balance this one, because it seems like a balancing nightmare. We have Susanoo, which is going to be God of Storms. By the way, shout out to the Ghost of Tsushima Legends players that have all the same gods in it that you think. Anyway, back to it. If you get a god power with Susanoo, where he basically puts a big sword into the ground, I've been told, and then he creates like a riptide using hair, and he knocks opponents upward. Think of it very similar to Oranos's or Oranos shockwave, where you use it basically to win a fight, pretty much. That's going to be a very basic, simple god power that we know how it kind of works already. So we have the classical age minor gods. Like I said in advance, I apologize if I butcher all these names. So we have Haminozame, I think it is, but basically this god power is like a healing spring from Frasetti in the Norse Pantheon, but it doesn't do healing, and it's a mix between that and the Hephaestus tree that you get from Thea. Basically, you spawn a tree with the god power, and then the tree does not do anything. It doesn't train units, it doesn't heal units. But when you have myth units in your, like, you've built myth units, right, and then you go attack the enemy, if your myth unit dies anywhere on the map, it will be resurrected by this Goshin Boku tree, I think it's called. And now the resurrection is not immediate. It doesn't just instantly resurrect myth units. It does have a bit of a timer, sort of like if you were to make the myth unit from a temple. This means if you have a myth unit that dies somewhere on the map, right, like, and then it starts loading into the tree, and let's say it gets halfway, and then you have another myth unit that dies on the map anywhere before that myth unit is resurrected, the myth unit that died after the first one will have no chance of being resurrected because the tree is already trying to resurrect one myth unit. So it's not a totally busted god power at all, but I think if you use this really well and appropriately, you'll get a lot of use out of this, especially if you're going big on myth units, which in the heroic age you get some pretty strong ones. Now, Midakatatomi, we don't have any specifics for this minor god and their powers, but my guess is it will aid the commoners, which is what the villagers are called for the Japanese, by the way. It will maybe help out the naval units, some water myth units as well, I could imagine. And then maybe it has, like, when you pick the minor god, it has an extra tech for water, example. Maybe fishing ships heal passively or something like that. Inari Okami sounds like it's going to be very similar to Horonos in terms of it's a minor god that focuses on scouting and line of sight. So I can see this god power having something to do with like scouting or being vision based. So basically, imagine Set's vision, you target anywhere on the map and it's revealed. It's probably pretty similar to that, or maybe you target one of your units and it gets increased line of sight for really large increased line of sight for a certain amount of time. I could imagine it being something like that as well. And maybe it will have a Kitsune specific tech, since they are going to be your scouts. Moving on to the heroic age, we have Hachiman. Hachiman has no information at all. Besides the myth unit that we get from it, that is pretty much the only thing we know about it. We're just going to have to see when it comes out, unfortunately. That's just the way it is. Raijin, however, their god power has been fully revealed and it's been all over the AOM social medias. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to show it on screen right now, and this is called Thundering Drums. Basically, it creates an electric field that is about medium size, and then every 5 seconds it grows bigger, and every 5 seconds it stuns opponents within the field. It lasts for 15 seconds altogether from what I've seen, and each wave increases the size of the field and, like I said, stuns the people inside of that field. It doesn't do any damage, and I think it only targets enemy units. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it accidentally stuns your own units within the electrical field as well. So it might be a bit of a catch-22 sort of god power. Now we have Fujin, Smiting Gust, very appropriate name for Fujin's god power, honestly. Basically, you create a large wind push, or a big force of wind that knocks enemies back, and it does some damage. Imagine the tidal wave from the Chinese, except it has a very much smaller area of effect, and it pushes enemies backwards pretty much and sends them flying backwards. Now we move on to the Mythic Age. Watasumi has a god power called Swirling Dragon Typhoon, and this is going to be a mix of Shockwave and the Horus Tornado as well, god power. So basically it will create what it says, a typhoon pretty much, and it will knock enemies into it, and then once they get caught in a tornado, they'll get knocked up and then they'll land on the ground. I think it won't do as much damage as a Horus Tornado because that thing does a lot of damage, but I think this version will get people caught in a tornado, knock them up, and then so they land, and then you have a strategic advantage fighting against them, basically. Now, Okunushuni, I've probably butchered that name, has no god power info, has no info on what they benefit or anything like that, and same with Takemiki Suchi, has nothing on them, so we're just going to have to wait and see what they have. Moving on to the myth units. Now, I just want to quickly talk about this. All of the myth units for the Japanese Pantheon have been revealed. So, I'm going to talk about all of them, everything that we know about them. We know all of the techs that come with them as well. But we'll be doing a bit of a fun game where we'll be trying to guess what resource they will cost and how much favor they'll cost and how much population they will take. Now, if you don't know, in Asian mythology, usually myth units are made from one resource, and one normal resource is what I mean. And this being either food or wood or gold. Usually there isn't a mix of one or two of these, it's just one sole resource and then favor and population. Very extremely and unlikely do we have myth units that cost more than one type of resource. Like there is a Chinese myth unit that costs wood and gold, which is an extremely rare case in the game. Most myth units as well usually cost about 3 population, except for the weaker ones. The really weak myth units usually cost 2 population. A normal myth unit will cost 3 population, and the really tanky ones, or the one with really high hit points, will cost 4 population. Let's talk about the free myth unit that you get. You're talking about, well, free myth unit. This is not even when you advance to the classical age. This is at the start of the game, and that's your scout, the Kitsune. Your early game scout, unlike all of the other Pantheons, this is completely unique to the Japanese, is a myth unit, which is so cool, and I don't know why they haven't done it before. It's basically an early game scout has, line of sight stuff. It will be more than just a scout though. Your Kitsune is used in your armies as well. Now you're probably saying, well, yeah, you can use a pioneer in an army from the Chinese Pantheon, so how's that all that different? The pioneers actually attack, right? They do this attack where they are archers and they're good against myth units because they're heroes. Kitsune is a myth unit. And basically, when you put it in your Japanese army, maybe you have one, maybe you have 2 smaller ones. When you put them in those armies, that entire army's movement speed gets boosted. So they move, like I said, this is the most strategic Pantheon. So you kind of have to use these Kitsunes in well-timed attacks, right? So you can get the benefit out of it. Now, there's also a tech that comes with this, which increases their hit points, gives them greater line of sight, and their movement speed boosts for armies. So like we said before, when you put them in an army, the entire army gets a movement speed boost. With this tech, they get an even more increased movement speed boost. I can see this scout costing about 75 food and maybe a small amount of gold as well, and around 5 to 7 favor. I'd be pretty shocked if it was 7 favor, to be honest. I think 5 is a bit more realistic, but maybe it's even less, like 4 or 3 favor. And I can see it taking up 2 population because, well, it's just a benefiting type myth unit, doesn't have a strong attack, and it's your scout as well. So 2 population I think will be very fitting for the Kitsune. The Kama Itachi, which you get from worshipping Ama Nozame, which I'm sure I've butchered again, has 2 special abilities. This sounds nuts. 2 special abilities on 1 myth unit sounds nuts, especially for the classical age. And this ain't even what I think is the strongest myth unit in the classical age, which is nuts. First of all, its first special ability is like the Sphinx from the Egyptian Pantheon, where it does like a sort of tornado attack and does AoE damage to people around it. It does that, and then it has a poison and bleeding effect, or poison and or bleeding effect, basically damage over time, to anyone caught in that special ability, which is just crazy. Like the Scorpion Man gets a sting on, like, a infantry unit, and then they lose HP over time pretty much. This sounds really crazy because they're 2 really strong special abilities in 1 myth unit, but their tech only increases their base attack, which means they only get 1 tech, right? And it doesn't do that much, which means this classical age myth unit is as good as it's going to get, like as it is pretty much. It probably costs 120 food, I would assume. I don't see it costing anything else but food, to be honest, because that wouldn't make sense. But then again, it has these golden blades on it, so maybe it costs gold instead, and that'd probably be 120, for example. And I could see this costing around 10 to 15 favor, but I have heard that this myth unit is pretty spammable, so maybe it's more on the side of 10 favor, maybe even less. And obviously it will cost 3 population because it's a very normal like myth unit. Next we have the Wanudo, which is given to the worshippers of Mina Katatomi in the classical age. Basically it has a attack that shoots a fire stream. This fire stream obviously damages people within it and has basically an AoE effect for the stream. So it's very similar to the Quinlan from the Chinese Pantheon, which I'm sure you guys have played as well. And yeah, honestly, I can see people building like maybe 1 or 2 of these in their army to do some extra damage, you know, overtime type thing. And that'd be pretty much it. It has 1 tech that increases the base damage and its AoE damage. So, like I said, you're only going to build a few of these for your army to do that extra bit of damage. I could see this costing 150 gold, but I could also see it costing 150 wood since it's a wooden wheel with a man's face on it. So, I guess wood would make sense. But, and it will probably cost something like 15 favor, which I think is going to be pretty accurate. And 3 population, because it's a very generic myth unit. The Jurogumo, which I'm sure butchered, is one of the craziest myth units I have ever seen. Now, I'm going to be totally honest, I think this is the strongest classical age myth unit that you get access to, like straight up. This is insane. It gets to the worshippers of Inari Okami, and just listen to this, right? It has an attack that grabs an individual. It stuns them by basically spinning them in a spider web, and then it gets a tech on top of this, which if you research, the damage it does also does dot damage, so it does the damage over time to that unit that it's ensnared, which is basically like a free kill. And if you don't know, this is very similar to the Frost Giants in the Heroic Age for the Norse Pantheon. Basically, Frost Giants are really strong because their special ability is really strong. And in a 1v1, a Frost Giant basically wins almost 9 times out of 10. Because its special ability freezes a unit, and then it just attacks them while they're frozen. And then their special ability goes on cooldown while they're attacking that unit that's frozen. And then by the time they get unfrozen, their special ability's back up, so they just get frozen again. And the other unit is not doing any damage to the Frost Giant, pretty much. That's almost how I see this unit working, which is just crazy. Oh, it's nuts. Not to mention, this thing has a tech that does dot damage, which is even more crazy than a Frost Giant. I think it would make sense if its special ability was not as good. I mean, it didn't recharge as fast as the Frost Giant. I think that would balance it out at least a little bit. But even then, this is a really strong myth unit by the looks of it. I don't see this thing costing anything other than gold. 220 gold to be precise. And then maybe costing something like 20 favor would be appropriate with a generic 3 population for a myth unit as well. Now we move on to the Heroic Age. This is for any minor god, and this is the water myth unit that we get, which is the Honeo. This thing is really strong against ships and has a special ability which is like an underwater dash. And any boat that is like above its underwater dash gets literally lifted into the air. And on top of this unit is already strong against ships. So I think creating a few of these in your naval wars is just going to be insane. If you don't know, when you launch units up, they obviously have a bunch of time where they're not doing anything because they're in the air. Then they gotta readjust to where they are, and then they like keep firing pretty much. It's like this water myth unit might be like one of the best in the entire game. One thing I will say is it seems like a really unique unit, so I give the devs credit for that. It's really cool that we get something this unique. And this is the only water myth unit that you get up until this stage. So in the classical age and in the archaic age, you don't have a water myth unit at all. I can see the Honeo costing around 250 food and 20 favor. Very similar to a Skylar from the Greek, pretty much. And obviously being 3 population as well. I know the Skylar costs, what is it, 250 gold, I think it is, instead of food, but I mean, they could do that with this as well, but I think food makes a lot more sense to this. Now moving on to the actual minor god specific myth units, we have Hachiman, which gives you access to the Tengu. The Tengu, I think, are going to be either one of the best or one of the worst. There's no in between with this. It's basically, how I imagine it is, it will be a better version of the Anabites from worshipping Anubis in the Egyptian Pantheon. It has a special ability where it dives onto enemies and then attacks them. When it does this, it gets increased attack and armor for a few seconds, which is really good. Now, I don't see Tengus being used too much in actual armies. I definitely see this being used in like raids mid-game, you know, forcing other enemy villages off gold and whatnot. Like the Tengu are going to be insane for that. And being a myth unit, we already know that villagers are very weak to myth units, unlike, you know, a lot of early mucking around with like hippies from the Greeks, for example, or the raiding cav from the Norse, where they can turn around, and if there's enough villager numbers, they can kill the horse. Whereas with the Tengu, you're a myth unit, so I don't think that's going to work out very well, especially in the heroic age. I can see this. There's one tech that they get which increases the leap distance, and they get bonus attack and armor when they do the leap, so it will be even better for raiding when you get the tech, which it might be already really good at it, and it will just make it a complete beast at it, which is crazy. I can see this costing 260 wood. Tengu, yeah, costing wood would make sense, but it could also be gold, fair enough. And being 22 favor seems pretty appropriate. Being 3 population is also appropriate since it's a pretty regular myth unit. Moving on, we have the Raiju from Raijin, which literally go hand in hand. But the Raiju is like a overgrown dog that has lightning powers, which is just sick. The special ability is from the Raiju is a AoE effect around itself and stuns the opponent's coordinate. Now, this is very similar to Raijin's Thundering Drums God Power, except on a much smaller scale, pretty much. This special ability, however, might be completely broken, or it's not as good as I think it's going to be. It literally creates an electric field around itself, this dog, and anybody caught in it gets stunned. This is nuts. So if there's like 20 units and it's used a special ability around itself, does it stun all 20 units? Like, that's pretty crazy. So I wouldn't be surprised if the special ability only stuns a certain amount of people within this radius, but then again, it might be like super insane and it stuns everything in its radius, which is just crazy. But yeah, it gets 1 attack which increases its movement speed because, well, it's a type of dog, it's fair enough, and it increases its base attack for this 1 tech as well. I can see this costing 250 food or gold. I think food is a little more appropriate. for this, and costing about 22 favor. I think this is the first myth unit that we've talked about so far that will probably cost 4 population, because it's a pretty big beefy dog boy. So yeah. By the way, using Raijus in armies I think will be insane. In the front line, you get them in there, they use their special ability, and then your rest of your army comes in and wipes people out. It's going to be crazy. Now, the Oni, which is given to you if you worship Fujin in the Heroic Age. This is the tank unit, pretty much, if you know what that is. There are plenty of tank myth units in the game. There are Scarabs for the Egyptians, Behemoth for the Atlanteans, Mountain Giants for the Norse. It's very stock standard type of unit now within the game, and the Oni will be that for the Japanese 100%. This unit will have a really high attack and really high hit points. It might be a little slow. That will be probably the trade-off, if anything. It will be really good at killing human soldiers. It will be really good at destroying buildings, because it will have high crush damage, much like the Scarab, Behemoth, and Mountain Giant. It's going to be the tank of your army. So you send it in there, it absorbs all the damage for your army, and then while everybody else does the fighting for you. I can see the Oni being paired up with the Resurrection Tree that we were talking about before. You get a lot of value out of doing that strategy, I think. Now, it has a special ability where it increases its attack and how fast it attacks, but it decreases its armor when it does this. So, basically, if you don't know, there's an Oni in DVD, which basically does the same thing, because they all come from the same idea. The Oni, literally, think of it as it loses its shit. It drops its armor, but it becomes incredibly strong. That's basically how it's going to be in the game. And there's one tech which sounds ridiculous. It's going to increase the base damage of the Oni, and it's going to give it even more armor. Which, honestly, it sounds pretty nuts. I can see this being probably the most expensive unit so far, maybe costing like 280 food, or maybe 250, much like the others. But being 280 food wouldn't be crazy either, and costing like 25 favor, because it is a huge tank and it does a lot of damage. Also, this is another myth unit that would be 4 population, because it's going to have really high amount of hit points. So the Umibozu is the first water unit that you get in the Mythic Age. Now, it doesn't matter which minor god you get, the Umibozu is going to be your water myth unit. And much like the, this is just a terrible name that I'm going to mispronounce, the Quan Wu from the Chinese Pantheon, which is the turtle, right? It's the turtle with a snake on it. Much like it traverses land and water. So this thing doesn't have a limitation on where it can go. The Umibozu literally looks like a mix between Upgrade from Ben 10 and Alien X. Pretty much the shape of Upgrade, and then has the color palette of Alien X. That's pretty much what the Umibozu looks like in game. Its special ability, which sounds crazy. This thing has a special ability where it can teleport to any water environment. I don't know if this has a range limit. The information has not been disclosed to us. But if it has no range, and you can teleport to any body of water as long as you've scouted it, obviously, that would be pretty crazy. You can literally just teleport to an enemy dock while your naval boats and like maybe your Honoyu, that was the water myth unit from the Heroic Age, is like fighting, and then this thing just teleports to the docks and destroys the dock. Well, I could see it being something crazy like that. I think this might be the first myth unit in the Japanese Pantheon that costs 2 resources rather than 1. Much like the Chinese snake turtle thing. I see it costing 180 wood and 180 gold, both of them. And costing around 16 favor would be pretty appropriate. Taking up 4 population, because the Umibozu is a big boy. I think it will have pretty high hit points on it too. Moving on to our first minor god myth unit, which is going to be the Shinigami from Watasumi. This is a ranged unit, and this is one of the craziest myth units I've ever heard of. This is crazy. Imagine, you guys know how Hades Shades work, where he has an infantry or like a normal human unit that dies, and it has a chance of coming back as a shade at the temple. But the Shinigami is a myth unit that you make from the temple, and then when it dies, it just resurrects itself back at the temple like a Hades Shade. Guaranteed. Literally guaranteed. There's no way around it that we know of so far. It has a special ability that's very similar to the Nemean Lion from the Greek Pantheon. It basically shouts, and it will, instead of stunning people like the Nemean Lion, it will cause units to run away, is what we've been told. Which, we don't have a mechanic like that in the game, like at all. So, it will be interesting to see how that even works. How it will cause targets to flee, to be honest. Like I said, when it dies, it respawns at the temple, and it becomes even stronger. Right? Not only does it respawn, but it becomes a better version of itself. And then, if you research the tech for this myth unit, which yes, it has a tech, it can die a second time and come back to life for a third time, and which, again, it's even stronger than its second life. This thing is guaranteed to have 3 lives. This is like the best resource value you can get out of a unit, like, ever. Unless, like, somebody destroys your temple. You're going to have 1 Shinigami is technically worth 3 Shinigamis. Because it, especially with the tech, right? It will come back guaranteed each time, at least 3 times, and then the 3rd time when it dies, it won't come back. Honestly, believe that if this is a really good myth unit, especially when it comes to attacking, this should be one of the most expensive myth units in the game. Just for its revivability alone. I can see this costing 150 wood and 150 gold. Because it is a ranged unit, it's not a melee unit. So wood and gold, much like an archer, would make sense. And then costing something like 35 favor, because this thing coming back to life so many times as it does is pretty crazy. I can see it being 4 population, however, it could be 3 population. I think it would be a bit more lenient for Shinigami. Now, the Onmaraki is a huge bird, a huge crow-looking bird, death bird. Yeah. Anyway, you get this from worshipping Okunoshuni. Sure, I butchered that again. Basically, it has a special ability that spawns little birds around it, and it does the attacking, much like, imagine if the mummies from the Egyptian Pantheon spawned their minions while battling instead of when they die. That's pretty much how this thing is going to work. And since it's a flying myth unit, it will attack everyone. It will not just attack units on the ground. If you have like a Caladria in the sky, it will be able to attack them. So there's like no limitation on its attacking. This will be really good at late game raiding. I could see this being used on, honestly, 1 on Meraki, on like a bunch of villages on gold. I see that working out, honestly, and his special ability causing like little crows to attack the villages while it attacks itself, like, will do so much damage. It also gets a tech that increases the amount of crows it spawns to attack, which are called wretches, and it increases the movement of itself and the wretches it spawns, which is crazy. I seriously doubt this thing would be used for anything other than like late game raiding, but you could use it in the army, I guess. But this thing is really used to disrupt your enemy's economy. I can see it costing 300 wood and around 26 favor, maybe a little less, a little more, and definitely being 4 population. I don't see this thing being 3 population at all. Last but not least, we have the Asura from Takemiki Suchi in the Mythic Age. This is a giant unit, and this is like a proper giant unit. It's not like the Oni, which is like a large unit as tall as a building. This thing is almost Titan-like. Not massive, not as big as a Titan, but it almost is Titan-like. It's extremely slow, so that is like the big trade-off of it. It is extremely slow, but it attacks the ground by like literally punching the ground, and it sends fire waves to the direction it's facing. It also has a special ability which shoots fireballs from like the circle thing on his back, which is crazy. It automatically targets enemies who are close to it with the fireballs. So if things get close to it, they got to deal with fireballs, plus they got to deal with fire wave. This Asura unit is going to be crazy. I think it's super unique unit, and it's going to have super unique resources and population attached to it. It also gets 1 tech, which these myth units getting these techs are pretty nuts. It gets increased attack speed, so not its actual attack, but just the attack speed. And then it reduces the cooldown on its fireball special ability. So anything that gets close to it will get punished even more. I think this is the first unit that will cost, in the entire game, 1 of each resource. I think it will cost 120 food, 120 wood, 120 gold, and 30 favor. You might think 30 favor is steep, but look at the size of this unit. And I don't see this thing being anything less, or costing anything less than 6 population. If it's anything less than 6 population, you might as well mass produce this thing. And I can see it being up to 8 population potentially, because it's might be a unit that, like I said, it's almost Titan-like, which is just nuts. Now, speaking of, that's all the myth units out of the way, except for the Titan. The Titan, as you can see, is completely unique. It's not like a humanoid Titan like the rest of the Pantheons have been. It's straight up like this crazy creature with like... it's like a huge Hydra thing. It's crazy. It has a special ability. You might have noticed all the other Titan special abilities are like to jump on the spot, and it does like a big AoE damage around everything. The special ability for this Titan is it leaps forward and does a really big amount of damage when it does so. This Titan's going to look so cool, and we're probably going to use it in the Heavenly Spear campaign, and it's going to be. So, let's talk about the infantry units and the buildings that you get and all that sort of stuff. So, first of all, your barracks is called a Guardhouse, and you get to make these units out of it. So, you get to get a unit called Yari Spearman. This Spearman is obviously a hard counter to cavalry, much like the Egyptian Spearmen are. You get these units called Umi Archers in the classical. By the way, this is all classical age in the barracks. You'd say basically a normal archer, good against, normal melee infantry units, a very generic archer. You get Bushi, which is a hero archer, much like the Pioneer, except it's not a scout. And yeah, very close to the Pioneer and the Gotti from the Norse Pantheon. It costs a little bit of favor, however, unlike all the other heroes. So more like the Pioneer, costs a little bit of favor to make as well. A hero archer is obviously going to be really good against flying myth units. Moving on to the stable. The stable might be called something else. We don't have an official name for it, but we're just going to call it a stable for now. There is an unnamed cavalry unit that is going to be a hard counter to ranged units. Like I said, we're going to see when the game comes out, I guess, because we don't have any information on it. Now we have a Yumi Horse Archer, which you get in the Heroic Age. This is going to be very similar to the Terma you get with the Atlanteans. This is a counter to anti-ranged units. So basically, it's really good against cavalry. It shoots arrows and is good against cavalry. Honestly, it might be a super balancing nightmare, this thing, I think. And it's definitely one of the most unique things. Next we have the Daimo, I think it's called. You also get this in the Heroic Age. It's a cavalry hero that costs favor. And I think it's so cool that we finally have a cavalry hero in the game. We have a lot of cavalry, we have a lot of heroes, but we've never had two in the same unit. I'm not a huge fan of cavalry, but a cavalry hero is really cool. We've had, you know, the Hussar from the Norse and the Godi being the normal infantry and then the ranged hero, but having a cavalry hero is really cool, and I'm pretty sure it's for the very first time we've dealt with that sort of thing. And obviously this is going to be good against myth units that are ranged, much like the Shinigami, for example, or the Manticores from the Greeks. So it will be used specifically for those as a hard counter. Next you get access to the Dojo. Now, the Shinobi is a unit that you get at the Dojo and can only be used in the Heroic Age and onwards. This Shinobi unit swaps between two modes. There's a stealth mode and then there's a normal mode. In the stealth mode, the movement speed is increased, but its line of sight is decreased. And this is going to be a counter to ranged units, I've been told. I'm not sure why they would do this, since like they have cavalry anyway, but it is what it is. Next we have the Samurai, which you can get in the classical age from the Dojo. This is going to be a very expensive unit, and it will probably take up quite a bit of population per unit, because it has a very unique XP type thing for each samurai, which is going to be crazy. This is a generic unit, the samurai, so it's going to be good against pretty much everything that it can attack, like the berserks, for example, in the Norse Pantheon. You have the Bushido meter, which I'm sure you've probably heard of. Gives individual experience points and makes samurais stronger each time you fill that Bushido meter. Now, Bushido meter on each major god also gives you a certain type of different bonus, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. Now, the Onimusha is something you get in the classic age. This is much like the Hussar. You're going to get a melee hero, and that's from the Dojo in the classical age. It's a very simple unit, I think, and it's just going to be maybe good against like centaurs, for example, because, you know, Poseidon's centaurs are really annoying, so maybe there's finally a counter for that. And then we move on to the fortress type building. We don't know again what it's called. I've heard some people call it a castle, which doesn't sound very Japanese, but I guess it doesn't have to. But we're just going to call it a fortress type building for now. Now, in the Heroic Age, you get a Scorpion type unit. It's like a half man, half Scorpion type unit. And it's designed to be a counter to siege weapons, specifically. And it's like okay against like normal infantry. So, yeah, I think this is the first time we've had a unit that's specifically built for siege counter. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, that's pretty crazy. And it has an AoE special ability, which we don't have much information on, but it's there. By the way, even though it's a hard counter to siege weapons, it is not a good siege weapon itself, so it is not good against buildings by itself either. Then you get access to the Onmyo, I think it's called. Anyway, you get it in the heroic age, and this is a hard counter to myth units that have ability to heal itself, which sounds really weird, and I don't know how they're going to do it, but it is what it is. It's a ranged hero unit with a very strong projectile-based special ability that we've been told. There's nothing else from the fortress type buildings that we have information on. We don't know if they'll have like a unique unit like the Atlanteans that have destroyers, or Zeus has Myrmidons, or we don't know if they're gonna get those types of units at all. Moving on to the town center, let's talk about the economy of the game, what thrives your play, which is, like I said, your normal villager is going to be a commoner. You only have one type of villager. It is very generic. It costs 50 food. Like I said, very similar to Greek villages. They gather at the same rate and they construct buildings, all that sort of stuff. It's very generic. They literally have one type of villager, so it's not like the Norse or the Chinese where they have multiple. It's only one type of villager. The Japanese, unlike all the other pantheons, have one drop site for both food and wood, like a storehouse. Imagine a storehouse from the Greeks, but instead of doing wood and gold, it's food and wood. And then they have a separate drop site for gold, which is interesting. Food and wood all together sort of doesn't really make sense, but oh well, it is what it is. I'm sure maybe they might change some maps around for that. But anyway, the other unit that you get from your town center is Miko. This costs 100 gold, and it's much like the Egyptian priests, that it's an early game hero that you're going to make out of your town center. Now, we don't know if the Miko can be made out of any other building besides the town center yet. So this might be the only way to make them, which means it might affect your eco a little bit, because it's not a unit that generates any sort of resource besides favor, which we're going to talk about, and it will obviously impede your villager production, which will obviously affect your eco. Now, this is going to be your early game counter to myth units, so when you get harassed early by like Zeus with a Minotaur, for example, or Minotaur I should say, they have the special ability to create shrines, much like the priests create obelisks in the Egyptian pantheon. You create a shrine as a Miko, and once you do that, you basically empower the shrine with that same Miko, or maybe a different one, and this starts generating favor for your Japanese playstyle. It's like the Greek villages, but you can only pray at one shrine at a time with one unit, one Miko unit. Placing shrines near natural resources like berries, trees, animals, and gold increases the amount of favor you get. So, if you place the shrine on like a map like a marsh, for example, near a forest, there's some berries near it, and there's a gold deposit near it, you place that shrine there, the Miko empowers it, you get really fast favor. But if you're on a map like Giza, for example, where there's not a lot on there, maybe there's a few hunt, no berries pretty much. I think there's berries, there might not be though. And you just put it in the middle of nowhere, you're still going to generate favor, but it's not going to be as fast. And it sounds like the further you get along in the game as a Japanese player, the less favor you're going to generate. Since the natural resources will get used up as you play the game, right? So, yeah. Shrines also cost 125 wood and 125 gold. So, there's some extra information for you guys. There is no information on Japanese docs, like at all. There's no information on what it's called, what type of unit it makes, besides like the water myth units. There's no information on the naval boat units that it makes, or the fishing ship, or anything like that. Or if it has like a water scout, we have no idea. So we're just gonna have to find out when the game comes out, literally tomorrow. And then we'll see how it goes. I will make another video after maybe a few weeks, just to do a recap on how the Japanese play and how it may differ to this video. But other than that, I really hope you guys enjoyed listening to me babble on about what we could expect from the Japanese Pantheon literally tomorrow, and maybe give you guys some insight, like I said, to play specific units the way they're intended to be played, or maybe they're not intended to be played that way. But yeah, like I said, if you guys like the content, please drop a like on the video if you want more AOM content on my channel. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I'm happy to answer you within 24 hours. And if you could, if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 1,000 subs. We might not stream AOM as much for the rest of the year. However, if you guys have a demand for AOM content, I will make it. So yeah, we stream a whole bunch of other games as well. Marvel Rivals, DBD. We're going to be doing Ghost of Yotei extremely shortly after the Heavenly Spear campaign comes out anyway. So definitely stick around for that. And we'll be smashing through that to the month of October if you are guys excited about that. And yeah, I make videos on Mortal Kombat, which is like literally the main basis of my channel. Mortal Kombat is a little dead right now. But hey, you know, we manage and we do some other stuff as well. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you.